All right, we're back. Let's see. Are we back? Are we back? Yep, good to go. Hey, this is Delta Peng with Peng Tech Peng. Tech Peng. Welcome, guys. So we were just trying to create a website. We're styling it a bit. You know, if you need help, you can always look around on the internet. Different resources. Again, like W3 Schools is great. It's like if you wanted to learn a bit more about CSS or something like that. Let's see. You go W3 Schools tutorials, you go learn CSS, you can learn JavaScript, HTML, Bootstrap. We'll talk a little bit about Bootstrap later. Yeah, so like, oh, CSS outline. No, it's cool. You see if you wanted to get like an effect like this dotted effect, or maybe we did backgrounds already. There's borders. Oh, some different border styles you can do. You know, we mentioned the, let's see, that this text is kind of close together and we don't really want that, right? And even if I put extra spaces in, it doesn't seem to change it. For stuff like that, for spacing between elements or within the element itself, like if you wanted maybe, hey, I want a little space, I don't want that right at the edge. That's where margin and padding, that's what those are about. So margin relates to, let's see if they give me a picture example. Margin relates to giving you space around the element, and padding is giving you space inside of the element. So, for example, so in this case, this is an element here. Well, I guess it's a piece of text. I can wrap it inside of an element or like a tag. I'll wrap it inside a div. Okay, save. So nothing happened. Okay, interesting. Well, kind of, I guess it already gave it a space there. Okay, by wrapping it in a div, it made it separate for some reason. You'd have to kind of play around with it. But okay, but other things you could do is like, okay, well, I still want some space. So double curly brackets. I want some space between the bottom and the top. So from this yearbook title element, this div which contains that text, I could say something like margin bottom, 5 pixels. And then we should see a change here. Yep. 5 pixels, 50 pixels, 10 pixels, okay? So that's the gist here. If I wanted space in here, it's like, okay, padding relates to the inside of the element. So I'd have to go input, okay, the style already exists, so let me inside the existing style. Let's say padding 10 pixels, oops. So that's gonna error out, it needs to be in quotes. Oops, 10 pixels, okay. So it gave me padding here, but if you don't specify left, right, top, or bottom, it puts it everywhere. So it gives me 10 pixels of padding to the left, to the top, to the right, and on the bottom. So like if I did 100 pixels, see now there's 100 pixels here, 100 pixels here, 100 here, and then 100 at wherever the end of this is here. Although that doesn't matter because there's all this extra space. We aren't running into the end. So to be more specific, maybe it'll be like, okay, padding left 100, or padding left 5 pixels. Okay, maybe a little bit more, 8 pixels. Okay, yeah, so now it starts a little bit away from the edge. And you might decide, hey, that looks a little better, so you want something like that. Okay, so that's how you would slowly sort of piece and style your website. Not always the best idea to. Some people don't like inline styles, like creating it at every single element. It's a little too specialized, and then hard to change later potentially, or hard to it could make things inconsistent. If you like, okay, one text box is like this and maybe another one isn't. But for now, for just playing around, it's good to sort of figure out how these things work for the future, and then just get a feel for CSS, because it can be pretty difficult. It can be pretty difficult to get your thing to look exactly how you want it to. So just play around with it and learn some more, and then eventually, eventually then you can refine it a bit more, or refine your coding style to be a bit better. But to start, you just want to jump in and you want to learn as much as you can and see what's possible. Once you know what's possible, then I think that's the way to go. All right, so let's see. What have we got? I guess one thing that would be useful would be learning a little bit about state now. So one of the benefits of React is being able to, again, sort of package this website code in a certain way so that you can reuse it. And that's not obvious now, but maybe later down the road it'll become obvious and you'll understand why I say that. But aside from that, React also provides you some different, some special utility functions or hooks that you can use. React hooks is what they call them, to get the functionality you need. One thing nice about React is that it's very fast. Normally when you load a website, it has to load all the data in, right? And whenever you change a website, it has to go back and reload all the data. But React is special because when you change something on the website, it can kind of limit and figure out, oh, you only changed this thing. Let me just update and refresh this thing. And that makes React, it might not matter for small websites, but for large websites, it makes React very snappy and fast compared to other ways that some websites are created. So that's a benefit. Another way that React handles things, one thing that we need to sort of understand is the way that React handles data. Because part of it, React needs to know when to refresh things, right? So with React, we can create variables that are just there temporarily. But if you need to create a variable with some data that persists or sticks around, then that data has to be put into a React state variable. So it has to be part of its state, is what's called. So the way that you want to look at it is that, let me see if I can, I don't know if there's probably a better way of doing this, but for now, I'm just going to try something here. Okay, there's your main app, and that's kind of where we're at, right? We're function app. This is the main starting point. So with React, okay, maybe I should have, okay. Give me a second. Let me just, okay. So we'll say React, our app starts up here, okay? And then the way that you should look at it is that it basically everything flows downward when it comes to data, okay? So because of this, when you're updating data or updating state, the state is the variable data, the containers of data that persist and that you don't want changing. Well, actually, wait a minute. you can change the state variables, but you want it to remain after a page after React refreshes certain parts of the page. It's the variable data that you want to keep around. So it can change, but it needs to persist. It can't like refresh when the page refreshes. For example, if going back to the code here, if I did a function like, if I had some variable like let, I don't know, local variable equal to hi mom, okay? Okay, so here's part of the power of JSX. So we talked about, okay, this is HTML, right? And then JSX is kind of like a mix of HTML and JavaScript. So here's some of the power of it. So where are we going? Text input. Okay. I'm going to say something like special message and then line break. So special message. So the power of, this is all HTML. The power of JSX is I can, if I use a curly bracket here, I can import a code variable into it. So whenever you have like the curly brackets, it's kind of like, or curly brackets like this, it's kind of like you're, like someone gave an example of, you're kind of like phoning home, or you're calling someone like, hey, you know, give me the data. You're calling the code and getting that data. So even though this is a code JavaScript variable, and this for the most part is HTML, by using the curly brackets, you're saying, okay, well, hold on a second, let me get something from the code and bring it back here. Okay, so if I do this, so special message, this is just plain text, and then I say, hey, give me this, whatever's in this container. So I press Control S to save. Oh, so now you have hi mom message, and I can put some quotes around it. Hi mom. Oh. Or hi dad. So this is powerful, right? Because now it gives us kind of like that variability, right? Now it's not just a static, this website always does the same thing or always spits out the same message. Now I can write some code to say something like, you know, I don't know. You could make a function like who's your favorite relative or something like that. And then based on whatever it spits out, like, oh, dad, mom, aunt, uncle, you could replace this data, and then your message changes. Or it could be like, hey, who's logged in to the website right now? Whoever's logged in, instead of saying, hi, dad, say hi, and then whatever the username is, you fill in that data. So that's the power of the code and the variability, and how that works with the website React world. Okay. So this is very nice because this is a function. You could put all your code stuff here, and then the return is like the HTML stuff, or HTML with some JavaScript. So the JSX stuff, that hybrid of stuff, is in just the return function. And that's kind of like the UI that gets spit out. All right. Okay, so that's some of the power, some of the potential, but if it's a variable like this, every time this part refreshes, you know, if this value is going to change back to whatever I set it to in the beginning. If you want it not to change, we need to use state or React state. Okay, so how does that work? All right, we need to import useState from React. I believe this is how you would word it, useState. useState from React, okay. And so instead of a local variable like this, you would say something like, man, I forget how it's written. So let me just look it up. React useState. Example. Okay, so yep, import useState from React. That part is what I did, good. And then you do something like this. Okay, so let's go ahead and put something like this in our code then. And so it's basically defining a variable, and then you define the function that can change it. So, and then this is the initial value. So instead of here, instead of HiDad, let's say we're changing that to hi. And this is the convention. You can name it anything, but they usually do the variable name and then set variable name. So let's say favorite, no, I don't know. Favorite dessert set. Favorite dessert. And then we'll say cookies. Once you have that, then you can call it just like a normal variable. I like curly brackets, favorite dessert. Okay. Okay, let me go save it. So I like cookies the most, okay? Because I didn't change it anywhere. It's using the default value of cookies. It's a little hard to come up with a good example on the fly, but later on, if I have some working sessions, perhaps this understanding state and seeing examples of it would make more sense. I'm trying to think of a good way of how you would show it otherwise. I guess you can look at other examples. There's other videos that talk about like, hey, counting, like a counting variable, and how that won't persist if you just use the local versus the state. But here's how it looks so that you're aware that this thing exists and where that exists and you're aware of the general purpose of it. So if I say, okay, set favorite dessert, then that's how you would change the value. So you can't, normal variables, you can set it like this. You can say that, you can say that, local var equals I guess I gotta try to go back to the original one also. Special message. What was it called? Local var. All right, what doesn't it like? React limits the number of renders for too many re-renders. Interesting. For some reason, it's giving me trouble. Let me. Okay. Okay, so it didn't like me setting it there, so that's probably needs to be set somewhere else then. There's some issue with that. Okay, so local variable, HiDad, but then I replace it with HiMa, and so what you get is HiMa. I guess the issue here would be it starts at a certain value. Well, it's a little bit weird. Because it changes it, I wonder what's going on behind the scenes here. But anyway, it could be something like, okay, some other useful common items could be like this, using the button tag. Button, which is a type of button. Click me to change fav. Okay, save. Okay, I'm gonna highlight this, and while it's highlighted, if I press tab, it'll move all of them together, or shift and tab will move it back. So if you create something like a button, and then you can create, it has an onClick function where if you change that, then, well, it just does something. It does, this is what happens when you click it, in essence. And you kind of need to structure it something like this. So let me go refresh it. So now I have a quick me to change favorite. So I like cookies the most. So if I click this, then it runs. If I click this button, which has the content of quick me to change favorite, right? Then it will set the favorite dessert. It'll set the state to something different. And if so, then this thing should change too. So click. So now it worked. It changed the state variable, and it should have known just to change this and not try to refresh the whole page. You can see that it was very snappy and quick. And so if I click it again, it doesn't matter because it's changing, it's the same value, right? Same value. But that's some of how state works and how you change state. It's because it's a little special compared to other variables. Okay, let's see. And kind of throwing a lot of stuff at you, but this is, these are some basic building blocks that would be useful. But, again, just take it one step at a time. It's not, it looks weird, but you'll get the hang of how it looks as you go. You just need to know basically how do you call a variable. You use the curly brackets, right? And like we talked about in earlier videos, don't make it overcomplicated. A variable is just a container. It's a container for some digital information. It's nothing really fancy or anything like that. So if you can sort that in your head, then it makes it easier. All right. Well, actually, here. How about instead of changing it to something directly, we can, whatever we type in here, that's what we should change this value to, right? That's where it'd be useful. So let's see if we can do that. So in the case of that, we need something that can get this text data and then set it to the state, right? This variable is a state variable, favorite desserts. So on the button press, what do we need to do? On the button press, we need to get whatever's inside this text box and set it to the state variable that's right here, right? If you remember the other example, it had something like onClick. Let's see if we can find that. Let's search again. React text box input example. Let's try that. Okay, so this is something like this. So the value changed last time, or it made it stuck. So we'll just not use that. It's on change. Handle change. Okay, so input, handle on change. So that's kind of like onClick. It's a certain event. When a certain event happens, run this code. Right? So in this case, on change, when a certain event happens, it's saying run this function. So that function doesn't exist yet. Let's go ahead and create it. We have to create it inside the main app function. So let's say let's say function handle change, parentheses, and then what happens when on change? On change, we want it to set favorite dessert, right? Set favorite dessert equal to some value. For now, we'll just, for testing purpose, we'll just see if this part works by itself. Cinnamon rolls. Okay, save that. Let's see, did it bug out or is it okay? Okay, didn't like something. This is undefined. Okay, right, this keyword doesn't like this keyword, so let's actually ignore that. Save. Okay, so on change. Oh, wait a minute. I just typed in one thing and then it became cinnamon rolls. So let me see. Let me try typing this, clicking this button here. It'll change it to ice cream, right? Okay, ice cream. If I type in something else. Okay, so this is kind of like, okay, it changed to cinnamon rolls again the moment I typed in something. Okay, how about if I try deleting something? Ice cream, delete. It changed to cinnamon rolls again. Okay, why is that? Well, because this event, this action is called on change. This means every time this changes, whether you add or subtract something, it says, hey, whenever it changes, run this function. What's that function? This function sets favorite dessert. How about instead, here might be a good example. Let's let number of times changed equal to 0. Okay, I'm creating a local variable, and I'm going to say, instead of cinnamon rolls, we're going to say number of times changed plus 1, right? That seems to, well, let's see. Actually, no, we're not going to say that. We're going to say number of times changed is equal to number of times changed plus 1. So first we're going to increment it, increment the variable, whatever the existing value is, add 1 to it, and then put it back in the original container. Yeah, that makes sense. So it starts with the 0. The first time you run it, it's going to be 0 plus 1. So the container now has 1. All right. And then the next time we run the change, it should be a 1, right? So 1 plus 1 is 2, and then it'll put it back in itself. So that sounds more accurate. Because otherwise, if it was number times changed plus 1 always in here, and if we commented this out and that didn't exist, then it'd just be 0 plus 1. Okay, it gives us 1. But then the next time we run it, it'd be 0 plus 1 again, which is 1. So that's why we have to change the variable if we want to increment upwards, right? Okay, so how about that? Control save. Well, and this I think is probably going to show us the value of state. Okay, so number of times changed, and just for the sake of seeing it, just to prove it to ourselves, we're going to say, well, here, let's see what happens. Okay, let's refresh from the beginning. Okay, if I type in something, I like 1 the most. Okay, that makes sense, right? We made one change, the number's 1. Let's try if we make another change. Okay, it's still 1. Oh wait, 2. 1. 1. Okay, this is kind of weird, right? It's not doing what we expect. We expect it to keep on counting upwards. So why is it doing that? Part of the reason is because it's a local variable. The value, so when the page refreshes at some point in time, because it's local, it's going to reset itself. So it starts at 0, you make it 1, sure, but then at some point React says, hey, I need to refresh the page. Let me refresh everything except for like the state variables. Okay, so it refreshes and says, okay, this guy becomes 0 again. So when you do the 0 plus 1, it just 1 again. Sometimes it became 2. I don't know exactly why that happened. Maybe there was a time where it saved it, but it recognized it didn't need to refresh it. But then later on it found a need to refresh, and then it went back to 0, and then 0 plus 1 is 1, right? So instead, let's change that to, okay, let's get another state variable. So control copy, paste, let's say state num times changed. This is a super long variable, but for the sake of explanation, being overly explanative, I'll go ahead and do it. Set state here. Okay, so instead of a string, we want a number. And okay, so let's replace this guy here. Okay, it's a state variable, so we have to use the special state changing function. So state number of times changed is itself plus 1. This might be a little bit funky, but this is probably going to mess up a little bit too. But okay, but generally speaking, this is better. Okay, let's try it. So 1, okay, 0 starts at 0. It starts at 0. Okay, now it's 1, 2. Okay, actually, it says working better, but why did it give us 0 to start? Okay, so now it's recognizing every change, right? Even by delete, every change, it's counting the number of times we changed, and it's persisting. So that's the power of state variables. It persists even though there's refreshing happening. Because it's a state variable, because we use this use state hook, we're telling React, hey, we need you to hang on to this value. Don't reset it like everything else when you're doing the resets or the refreshes. Okay. So it works, but it started with 0 for some reason. Why is it doing that? And one of the reasons is, let's take a look at, let's write it down here. Special message as 0. So the local count is, okay, curly brackets, because we need the code variable. So local var and state count. The state variable count is, let's see, it was what we call it, state num times changed. Okay, is that correct? Oh, num times changed, yeah. Sorry there. Num times change. Save. Okay, so the local count, okay, and it's still 27, so, oh wait, 27. Okay, this is already giving you a preview of what the issue is, but it says the state variable is actually 27, even though our message said 26. So why is that? The reason is you're changing the state variable here. So it's like 20, when we got the message, it's a little hard to explain. When we got the message, the value of here was 26 at the time. So the special message 2, favorite dessert. So when we set this value here, this was 20, the value of state num times change was 26. And so it's 26, and it used 26 for here, and it used 26 for this value when it set the favorite dessert, right? But it didn't update itself to say, hey, it's actually 27 right away. It used everything as the current value of 26 for everything. And it updated, yes, we could see that it updated, but it didn't have the updated value when it was, it didn't update the value and then move to the next line. It kind of just did this line with the 26, and it did this line with the 26 also. So that's kind of what happened. So it's persisting, but you have to be careful of when you're using that same, if you change that value and you're also using it in the same function, there's a chance that it's using, the old value and not the updated value, or it is using the old value is what it seems like in my experience. So you might have to do something like, okay, I'm just gonna have to mimic the changes here since this is just text, just so that it's accurate to. So now, okay, now it's all 28, 29, 30. Where if I didn't have that save, you can see it's, as I add new ones, okay, yeah, so it's 36, 37, 38, so it's lagging one behind. Oh, and as I'm doing this, looks like the local count, it just keeps on being 0. Well, I guess I did get rid of the plus, so let me, okay, now let me try it. Okay, so, okay, So even though, okay, so this is changing, but the local count keeps saying 0. Okay, so why is that? I would say internally this number is 1. It's 0, but then at this point it becomes 1. But whenever it comes to, so if you need to persist a variable, it needs to be a state. And if you need to show that value on the UI, if it's a value that changes, then it also needs to be state. Because in this case, it's just showing us, it calculates, okay, this is 0, and then it runs through this. It's like, okay, it's looking for, it's looking for what number of times changed. Okay, that's 0, so I'm gonna equal 0. But then when it changes here, because it's not a state variable, okay, because it's not a state variable, it doesn't tell, React doesn't tell the system that it needs to update the display. Okay, so that's part of state variables. If state variables change, it persists, and it also lets the system know that you need to update the GUI with that new value. Because otherwise, it's like it changed, it's a 1, but it's just all kept internally, and it doesn't bother to update, doesn't bother to refresh or update the display because it doesn't think it needs it, because it's not a state variable. All right, I think that's the better way to say it. All right, sorry, I know this kind of a jumble, a bit confusing there, but that's the gist. If you need to persist it, or if you need the GUI to update when it updates, you need a state variable. If it's local, if it updates, it'll just be internally updated and tends not to show that, it doesn't show that updated value there. And then that precaution of if you're updating a state variable and also trying to show it in the same function, you're just going to get both the old values here. All right. But yeah, that's so far so good. How much time we got on this guy? Okay, it's getting a little bit long. Now that we understand a bit of how state works, how do we get this into favorite dessert instead of the count? Well, when you're doing something like handle change, it's also coming packaged together with an event object. And so if you call it usually E, I don't think the name's important. I think it's whatever you name it is what it will be. Let's try event. So let's say console. Here's a way to debug console log. Check the event. Yeah, this is kind of jumping ahead. But I'll just do it so you can sort of see it. Console log means you're sending a message, a debug message. So if I type F12, now you see some of my code error code messages here. So it's for debug, but other people, if you leave them in, other people can see it. So okay, let me go and refresh. Okay, some errors, I don't think these probably aren't important at the moment. Okay, so console log. So handle change, this thing will only occur when the console log happens. So let me try typing something. Huh, okay, I'm not seeing the message. I was expecting to see a message. Okay. Div cannot appear as a descendant of P. Why is that happening? Let's try refresh. I might have to mess around with this a bit. There should be wall against something here. Unless these other things are getting in the way. Alright, well, it's a long video. I'll call it for now, and we'll see.